Hoops through life. Hoops through life.
Welcome to another episode of Hoops Through Life, a podcast where we discuss everything related to women's basketball player development, the collegiate recruiting process, and transition from high school to college. I'm your host, Elsbeth Bierman. Our guest today is Gary Chupik. Gary is a professional mental performance coach, leadership coach, writer, and speaker. He's the founder of Elite Mindset, a company dedicated to helping high performers get better and be better. Gary is passionate about progress, efficiency, and continuous learning, drawing from performance psychology, neuroscience, and the wisdom of top performers across various fields. He applies everything he teaches to himself first, learning through trial and error to refine the most effective strategies. He loves sharing his knowledge with motivated individuals, helping them unlock their full potential. I'm excited to dive into today's conversation. Gary, thank you so much for being here.
It's such a privilege to be here. Thank you.
All right, so let's start with you. What led you to specialize in mental performance coaching?
Well, I grew up an athlete and grew up playing high school football and a little bit of college football. And I've always used coaching as part of my repertoire. Like even when I was playing sports, I always sort of paid attention to the mental side of the game. I wasn't the biggest player or the fastest or certainly the best. But being captain of our football team, I would attribute to just my mindset. Because I don't know, there wasn't anything else really that I had to offer to my team other than my mindset. And so that was a big part of my my upbringing and playing sports early on. And then I was a pastor for 28 years and in leadership. And there's all sorts of different modes of pastoring or styles, just like every other industry. But mine was coaching. So I was coaching before I even knew what coaching was. And I wasn't much of a teller, but I was much more of a question asker and like, hey, what do you think you want to do in this situation? Or even from the platform, I would say, what do we want to do with this information? What do we want to do with this? And how do you want to live your life? And so a lot of it was just sort of question asking, which was a great fit for coaching. And so I had been in the ministry for 20 years, still am an ordained pastor, but I had a midlife crisis. I had a burnout in 2018. I thought either I buy a Camaro or I sort of hit the reset button in my career. And I was in a funk, and it was really interesting. I think I was too familiar with counseling language because I had counseled literally hundreds, if not thousands of people. And I think I was just in the jar. I couldn't get out of it. And so a lot of that language wasn't helpful to me because I think I had associated with helping other people so often. I just needed a new language. I just needed almost like a computer language. I just needed a new language to help me out of my funk. And so a friend of mine said, hey, have you heard of Trevor Moawad? And Trevor was Russell Wilson's coach or quarterback of the Seattle Seahawks at the time. And I said, no, I'd never heard of Trevor. And he said, yeah, you should read his book. It Takes What It Takes. And so I read it and I just felt like, oh my gosh, I had just died and gone to heaven. I was like, finally somebody talking my language. And I just had never heard it before. I had read The Inner Game of Tennis by Timothy Galloway way back when, and which was super helpful. And I thought, why aren't there more books written on this? And I think that was 1972. And when he wrote that book, it was sort of a breakthrough in mental performance. And I'm not even sure he knew what he was writing at the time, but it was a pretty amazing accomplishment for him and how many people he helped. And it was like one of the very first books in sports psych that sort of launched the industry in 1972. So I was a little bit familiar with some of this stuff. And then, so after reading It Takes What It Takes, I had put 1,000 hours of study into sports psych. I had no intention of doing it for a living or making it my profession. I was just in love with it. And so I'm not exaggerating when I say I put 1,000 hours into it. And so one day, just randomly, a friend of mine said, hey, would you like to meet Trevor Moawad? And I was like, wait, what? Like, he goes, yeah, no, I'm friends with the family and I'm friends with him and I know his brother. And I said, well, like a kid in a candy shop, I was like, would I? Of course I would. And so I had an opportunity to meet him. And he said to me, hey, would you like to meet again next month? And I was just like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? Like, absolutely, yes. And he said, by the way, the next time we meet, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to put together a protocol. Like, how would you help an athlete go from, good or average or good to elite. And I said, yeah, let me put something together. I'm a strategic thinker. Let me do that. So I put it together, and he looked at it and he said, man, I gotta hire you. I got to put you in touch with some people. And so, which he did. And so I had a sort of a short stint with Limitless Minds, and didn't do a ton of work for them. But, when you have someone of Trevor Moawad's caliber, who at the time was on ESPN, and he was like king of the castle, right? King of Mount Everest. He was at the top in mental performance. When you have someone like that affirm you, it's kind of cool, like all that self-doubt and imposter syndrome sort of goes out the window when you have someone of his caliber say, "Man, you got really good stuff. You should think about doing this for a living." And so I kind of went down that track a little bit, and it was really, really fun. And then finally he said, "Why don't you just go it on your own? Like, you're already doing this stuff. You just start your own business and go for it. And if you started your own business, what would it look like?" And so I created two things. One of them was called a game plan for life, because I was trying to figure out my life. And because I'm a strategic thinker, it looked like an X's and O's board, right? Like a play, like in football, like a John Madden teleprompter. So I had all these sheets all over my wall, and I was just trying to figure out my own life and my own identity. And so now I do what I call identity-based mental performance. Because if I cookie cutter something on to someone else, it may or may not work. But if I can draw the best out of you and use whatever wiring you presently have, then and just help it evolve and grow, then that's a winning formula. So I have a game plan for life, and I have a playbook for the mind, which is my mental performance thing that I showed Trevor Moawad, and that my own specific, unique protocol. And I think there's a real sequence to mental performance. And I think most mental performance coaches and people just think, if I just slap this here and slap that there, then I'll get resilience. The outcome will be resilience, or mental toughness. But that's not the case. That's not how it works. It's like baking a cake. If you don't have things in the right sort of sequence, if you don't have those ingredients in the right sequence, you're not really getting the intended outcome. So I was able to figure out ways to try and sequence things and experiment and fail. And so I ended up starting my own business and doing this, and then working really hard and making lots of phone calls. And there was a lot of times where I didn't know how I was going to make this work, and I'm not the greatest business person. So I've been more interactive with people and more sort of boots on the ground. So it's been a challenge to figure out how to do the business side of it. But everything's figure outable, and I was able to do that and get in touch with the right people. And so the last few years of my life have been my best and my favorite. And I think the best is yet to come, as hopefully I can have and continue to have a global impact.
Yeah, there's excuse me, there's so much in there that I like wanted to dive into at different points. But what I'm curious to know is, if we talk about the cake analogy that you just used, what is to you, in your experience, that base layer? Like you said, it's a progression. You need to stack things that in a way that makes sense, or else I'm assuming it could potentially be harmful for an athlete if you try to do like
Mhm.
something step 10 at step one. So what would you say is that base layer? Because I work with a lot of like high school, middle school, and even sometimes elementary school athletes. And yeah, it's like breaking things down that way. I know I'm guilty of this, of trying to do too much all at once. And it's something, mental performance, it takes layers, it takes months, years to really get into that system. So I'll stop blabbing on now, but like what would you say is that layer?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So I think of it like a bullseye. So I think every really great mental performance coach should have an image that describes what they do, like their model or their protocol. And so for me, I have a bullseye at the center, and inside of the bullseye is a pyramid. And that's the core of what I do. And just to set this conversation up, because I think it's a really valuable one. I was working with a mental performance coach in the Major League Baseball, in Major League Baseball, and we were disagreeing on what the core is. And so he was saying that the core was motivation, and I was saying like I don't think that's the case at all. I think it's self-leadership because I think self-motivation kind of wanes. It can go up and down, and it's not super consistent, and a lot of it depends on your feelings. But to me, the holy grail in that foundation that you're talking about is self-leadership. So I don't have to be motivated to lead myself well because I might sort of depend on my disciplines or my habits or my rhythms that I have in my life, which are all identity based, by the way. They're still identity based, but to me, self leadership is the fundamental key. Your ability to lead yourself will either make or break you. And think of like someone, let's say, who's a Navy SEAL and they're doing something very, very difficult. Do you think that they are motivated in that moment? Probably not. I was working with the defensive tackle in the NFL, and I said, hey man, like I said, how motivated do you have to be to do well, and playing at your caliber? And he says it's not part of the equation. I went to a mental performance conference a couple years ago in Vegas, and it was a 2-day conference. Not one time did I ever hear of the word motivation. Think about that. You go to a mental performance conference and you never hear the word motivation. And so I think that underlies exactly what I'm talking about is your ability to lead yourself is everything. So you can be taught, world-class teaching. You can have all the support in the world. However, if you don't really lead yourself, then it's not going anywhere. So think of like a cup that's let's say the bottom is 0 and the top is 10. And your level of self-belief and the way that you lead yourself, let's say you feel like that's a 4. And so everybody leaks at the level of their self-belief and self-leadership. So let's say you're working with a high school student whose self-belief and self-leadership is a 4, no matter what you pour into them, they're going to leak at a 4. And so you and I see that as coaches all the time. You kind of go, okay, wait a minute here. We have to raise that level of self-belief and confidence, and self-leadership, because if we don't, then they're not really going to grasp everything that's being, we're pouring into them. So it really starts with self-leadership, and the leadership pyramid has 5 layers. So the first layer is self-leadership. It never ends. And you and I both know that in our businesses and what we do in life is you never stop learning, you never stop growing, you never stop challenging yourself. And your character and your integrity matter every single day. It doesn't matter. It matters every single day. So that always needs investment. The second level is if you lead yourself well, then you can lead somebody else. And that's called couple leadership. I'm not talking romantic. I'm just talking about another person being an example, mentoring, coaching. But I don't want you to teach somebody else if you're not showing good self-leadership, but because you're poisoning that person and your example to them is not very good. And so I want you to lead yourself so well that you can lead another person. Then once you do that, then you can lead a group. And why do we want you to lead another person before you can lead a group? Well, we always want you to be pouring your life into somebody and mentoring somebody else and having a protege and coaching somebody else so that you can multiply the strength of that group. So it's self-leadership, couple leadership, group leadership, and then area or department leadership. So think of like a football team and you have linebackers and DBs, and linemen, you know, and an area or department might be the defensive backs. And so if you can lead yourself well and lead another person and lead a group, then you can lead an area or department. Maybe you can be the defensive captain of your team, right? It's a group of groups, essentially. And then finally, we have organizational leadership. And in order to be a really great organizational leader, you have to know how areas and departments function. You have to know how groups function. You have to have players pouring their life into other players, and they have to be able to lead themselves well. So ultimately, if we're not taking care of ourselves at the self-leadership level, it sends stress fractures up an entire organization. We know that the leadership of the primary leader is crucial to the health of an organization, whether it's a team or a business. And I live out here in Seattle where, and I'm not afraid to say it, there's some companies out here that are epically good and perpetually good. And there's others like Boeing who pass blame on to everybody else. And every other level of the leadership pyramid, they're blaming, it's not our fault, it's their fault, it's not our, and then you have to lie, then you have to not be honest, and then it just is toxic for an entire, and it all starts with the CEO. It all starts with that person, whoever he or she is. And so the self-leadership never ends, but that is the holy grail of mental performance.
Yeah, and I think one way to think about it too is we are all our own CEOs,
Mhm.
right? And so what's some examples of self-leadership from an athlete's perspective?
So there's people have a visceral reaction to the word disciplines, but it doesn't have to be, or when I say habits, instantly people are like, yeah, habits, they're awesome, or they think, oh, habits, like this is not. Well, the way that you express your self-leadership, and you've pegged it right on, is you express your self-leadership by either you can choose the term. It's either disciplines, habits, or what I like to call rhythms. So, what are the rhythms I can live my life by that put me in the best position to succeed? I cannot, and nor can any athlete, control an outcome, but you can always put yourself in the best position to succeed. So, it's our job as coaches and even as athletes to put ourselves in the best position to succeed. And so, that's how you reinforce that sense of self-leadership. So, it's what can I do in my day every single day that puts me in the best position to succeed. So I have 7 things in my day. I call it the locus of control. So I have an internal locus of control, which means that I can control all 7 things, whether they happen in my day or not. But when I do them, I am in the ultimate best position to succeed every single day. And so I have a calendar in my closet and give myself a W or an L every single day. And if I did 4 of them, I won the day. If I did less than 4, I lost the day and I put an L. But I can tell you that when I'm not feeling well and I can look at that calendar and see, a string of losses, then it makes sense that I'm not feeling well or doing well. But when I'm doing those 7 things and I'm getting some momentum, like 2 W's in a row is pretty good. Getting 3, now you have a winning streak. 4 is you have momentum. And so momentum is crucial, not just in sports, but in life.
If you don't mind sharing, what are, a few of the your locus of control?
Sure. Yeah. So it's a process I called win the day. So my 7 things are get 7 hours sleep. So that's the best performance enhancing drug in the world. I was walking on a field with a coach, and he was going to play a playoff game, and both team had the same record. And the coach said to me, "How do I win this game?" And I just said, "Sleep better than the other team." And he
Mhm.
laughed at me, and I said, "I don't know why you're laughing, because like the science is really clear that you're stronger, faster, more emotionally regulated, fast twitch muscles, decision making. Like there's 15 things that matter with, getting 5 hours sleep versus 7 or 8 hours sleep. So you can laugh, and they ended up winning, by the way. But yeah, I mean, sleep better than the other team. So sleep is crucial, number one. Number two is I do something called blue sky time. So I like to dream. I like to dream about doing crazy things. So, and the key is to follow through with your crazy thought, because who knows, it might come true. And I've had so many times when those things have come true for me. So blue sky time. Number 3 might was go to the gym, so move. Number 4 is eat well and my nutrition. Number 5 is learn something new every day. Number 6 is quote my personal philosophy. And number 7 is learn something new every day. Because I'm an information seeker, I love to learn in my craft. I'm not much of a book reader, but I love to read research papers on sports psych. So, because I find myself jealous if I read something in a book, I'll be like, oh, I wish I would have said that, or that's so fantastic. And so I just think, okay, Gary, keep your head down, be as original as you can possibly be, and read the research and then interpret in your own way and come up with an illustration. That's kind of so that people can remember the concept.
Yeah, and reading research papers is a skill in its own right. Sometimes those things can be pretty dense, but yeah, no, that's awesome. And I love and I think this is worth repeating. All seven of those things are completely within your control. Like 100%. It doesn't matter if it's raining, it's snowing, or anything like that. Like you have control over doing all of those things, and I think that's just something powerful to remember. I'm curious to know your opinion on like you talked about motivation and you were butting heads with somebody in your field about, oh no, it's self-leadership, no, it's motivation. And if I when you said that, I think about different things I see on social media, like short video clips or that coaches post or people in the sports world post, and it's always centered around motivation. That's what it seems like to me is it's like a rousing speech to pump somebody up, to motivate somebody or to kind of it seems like the underlying message is you need to be motivated to do this. And so I'm curious to know if you see that same theme or what your opinion is on why motivation might be so talked about in self-leadership, not as much.
Yeah, I mean, we're all looking for quick fixes, right? Like quick dopamine hits. And I think motivation's kind of like that. Is what can I listen to that'll give me a quick dopamine hit that I can feel better and say, "Oh, I love that." Well, yeah, I mean, no one's going to disagree with something that's, really spot on when it comes to motivation. But I think it's that, that microwave motivation. Like how can I tap into that right away to help make a difference in my life? Whereas I think figuring out the difference between what you want and what you really want is pretty crucial, because if you ask me what I want, like this upcoming Sunday, Super Bowl Sunday. So if somebody said, what do you want on Super Bowl? I'm like, well, I'm going to try some shotgun shells of smoked meat, and I'm like, and I would drink Coke and have chips and put my feet up. And like, that's what I want. Well, a lot of people live their life every weekend that way. They look forward to college football, putting up their feet, drinking a beer, or having, just kind of not doing anything. Um, but is that what you really want for your life? Is to live for those weekends so that to get what you want? Because I want to work on the things that what I really want in my life. And what I really want with my life is very different than what I would say that I want. What I really want is I want a generational impact in people's lives. I want the fruit of my life and my coaching to grow in other people's trees. So when they succeed, I feel like I succeed. So for me, it's really, really important just to dial into like what I really want. And once I can do that, then I can order and orient my life in such a way as to be spending 90% of my time on what I really want and 10% of my time on what I think I want. So I think there's a huge difference. And I think the being in touch and willing to pay the cost for what you really want is it's not beyond doing it daily. Like you can really do that. And that kind of intense, calm focus will propel you to new heights in whatever you're doing in your life. So it's just the sort of that consistency of like, what do I really want? And how do I chase that? And how do I go after that? And I'm not I'm a little bit different than a lot of other people. I'm a little bit I want to say the truth gracefully. And sometimes an athlete will be, doing their thing and working hard or whatever, but sometimes they just don't try hard enough. It's like you expect to be good, but you don't want to put in the work. There's not the ratio is not congruent. And I'm like, you probably need to work harder. Like you gave up too soon on this and you're better than that. And I know you've got more levels in you. And so I'm going to tell you something that the culture, you'll never see it on social media, but it's like try harder. I know you can try harder. And so you're discouraged, but yeah, I would be discouraged too if I put in the effort that you are, but you're not really seeing the result that you want. So yeah, it's a very fascinating conversation. I was helping an athlete, a runner, long distance runner, and there was 100 people in the race. And he was on the younger side, so he didn't expect to win first place, but he finished in like 13th place or something like that. Like it was pretty impressive. And he said, I said to him, well, if nutrition, if this was a race of nutrition, in what place would you have finished? Like, how did you eat the week before you actually ran? He said, well, I probably would have finished in 65th. I'm like, okay. The fact that you finished in 13th is pretty darn good, you know? Well, let me tell us about your sleep. What place would you have, 47th? Okay, 47th. And, tell me about how hard you trained the week before and like how you took care of yourself and were you mindful of all these, well, probably about 20th. Well, how did you hydrate? Probably about 30th. And I'm like, well, that's really impressive that you finished in 13th because all of your preparation was telling us that you probably should have finished in 30th or 40th. And so matching the expectation with the work that people put in, I call it the illusion of choice, is right. If you want to be average, you got lots of choices. All right. Think of the menu at, the Cheesecake Factory. If you want to be good at something, you just have way fewer choices at the Cheesecake Factory. But if you want to be an elite eater, you probably have no choice. There's only a couple things you can pick on that menu. And so I think helping people understand their expectations and the work that they're putting in and making that connection for them is really valuable.
Yeah, and I love how you broke it down into the different parts of what training looks like. And when you mentioned finding out what you really want, it reminded me of this exercise I did. I feel like I found it in a magazine somewhere. I can't remember where, but it was something along the lines of lists like the 15 or 21 things that you want to do. Okay. Now pick 10 of those. Okay. Pick 10. Okay. Now pick three of those. Okay. Pick three. The three in the way they flipped it at the end was the three things that you chose, those are what you're focused on. Everything else on that list, never even look at it. Because like you said, it's like, what do you want versus what you actually want? And those things are going to be the easiest distractors from what I actually want because I do want them, right? But just maybe not enough. So, but I'm curious to know when you're talking to or if a coach is taking that mindset philosophy and talking to like a middle school or a high school athlete, how can they maybe adapt that to somebody who doesn't really know what they want, right? Like things change. Maybe they want to be an astronaut, but no, now they want to be a teacher, or now they want to be, and it's just like even just that idea of them trying to figure it out. How could they potentially adapt that idea to make it a little bit more appropriate and flexible for a young athlete?
Yeah, it's such a good question because when you take a cookie cutter approach to mental performance, it kind of doesn't work oftentimes. And so it's like, well, what is unique about this particular player? And for example, with the Seattle Mariners from the pros all the way down to single A, they have a file on every single player, and they're trying to figure out what will turn this player on. So they've got this file, and they're trying to figure out, what's the secret sauce to unlocking this player's potential. And I really appreciate that. I remember Pete Carroll told me one time, he said, Gary, Simon Sinek said it starts with why, but I'm telling you, it ends with who. And there's a who that most people want to do things for. Like maybe it's yourself, maybe it is. It could be for a loved one, it could be for a parent, it could be for a significant other, whoever that is. I think that's pretty important to try and figure out. But I think that most players have something that will unlock them. And our job as coaches is to figure out what that is. But it's not the same for everyone. For example, a lot of people would love public recognition as a reward, But if I was to recognize my wife publicly from the stage, she would have a heart attack. Like she would absolutely hate it. So you can't take the cookie cutter approach. And so what drives and motivates one player is not going to drive and motivate the other. And so you do need to do your homework on every player and say, what would draw the best out of it? Is it encouragement? Is it being more challenging and getting in their face? Is it a quieter approach? Is it publicly saying something to them? Or is it privately? Like if you're going to correct them, is it better to do it in private and just quiet? You have to figure that out as a coach and treat every player separately.
Yeah, I completely agree with all of that. I did want to go back to something you said before about the what you want and what you really want piece. And one thing that I try to remind the athletes is, and it's okay if you don't want it, right? Like find the
Mm.
thing that you want to work for. It doesn't have to be basketball. It doesn't have to be sport. And
Mhm.
from my experience, a lot of athletes feel like that's what it has to be. Like that's the path they're on. So they have to want it. They have to say the things that they want, but their actions clearly aren't aligning with their words. And so I've been in communication with multiple athletes who have sought me to help them through the recruiting process. And then when we actually get to it, it's really they don't want this. They don't, that's not what they want to do. And they decide to move in a different direction, and that's okay. But sometimes it feels like nobody's even asking them that question of, well, wait, is it what you want? But also it's okay if this is not what you want. And we'll find
Yeah.
that thing.
Well, that's brilliant because as they get older and as we sort of live in the adult world, when we do trainings for, corporate trainings for businesses and in mental performance, we are connecting what they're doing. Let's say sales or something. We're connecting that to something bigger in their life. And so, yeah, if we can make that connection for them, I think it's really powerful. Have you seen that graphic? It's amazing. It's just hard to believe, but I believe it, but it's hard to believe. Is that it's something like, 91% of all female CEOs or C-suite executives played high school or junior or college sports. 91%.
Yeah, actually, a friend of mine sent me that graphic. Yeah, I did see that, and I thought that was insane too.
Yeah, and so like all these skills that they're learning, like the reframing failure and the putting into practice and teamwork and how to work as a team and your resilience. I mean, your emotional regulation, like your self-talk, like even as a business person, how important is your own self-talk? Like nobody talks to you more than you. Like
hmm
it's you, and so you should be kind to yourself and you should really encourage yourself. And yeah, and so finding that thing in younger athletes and say, hey, listen, as you succeed in this, here's what's the potential for you in your life. Like this is the seeding area, right? Like we want to make sure that we're watering these seeds. So you're absolutely right. If you can connect it to other things beyond just that sport in the moment, yeah, it's really powerful.
Yeah, and personally for me, and I think I hope coaches remind themselves of this as well. Other coaches, specifically youth coaches, is sometimes I get caught up in, oh, we gotta be the best, or we have to do this. But then I self-talk again, bring myself back down to the reality of, if I'm working with 100 middle school athletes, maybe 15 of them will play in high school. And then you work with 100 high school athletes, five out of that 100 is actually going to continue to play in college. And it's like 90% of the athletes that you come in contact with as a youth coach are probably going to end in like 4 to 8 years. That's when it's going to be over. So, what is it really that you're doing here? It's really not about winning on the court. It's about all these lessons that we're talking about right now that plant the seeds to have them succeed, when they are in a group or when they're in college and they have to make a decision between, going out and partying till 3 a.m. when they have exams for the following week. And it's like the confidence and the leadership that they have in themselves should carry through to help them make those decisions.
Yeah, and Elspeth, this is just my conviction. I'm constantly testing it. Like you and I always stress test what we teach, right, on
hmm
ourselves and our own lives. But one of the things I've been stress testing is like, what is it other than sports that is producing leaders in our community and society better than sports? I can't think of one. I can't think of it's like, with all due respect to education, it's
hmm
not producing the leaders that sports does. I'm a religious guy. The church is not producing leaders better than sports. All these other institutions are not producing leaders better than sports. Sports is a gift. And so it's like the best thing out there. And so for me, I'm just like, oh, like this is worth pouring my life into. The sports is the vehicle, right? But teaching leadership and encouraging and bringing the best out of the people that we work with, man, that is what we care about more than anything is watching people grow into amazing people and do amazing things with their life.
I will I will co-sign everything that you just said. I agree very strongly. So if a youth coach wanted to encourage more resilience or confidence is a big one that I hear all the time, into their athletes, knowing that they might not have the background, knowing that they might not have like extensive one-on-one time with these athletes, what's something that you can recommend that they try to do that might be a little bit helpful for them?
Yeah, well, I created a protocol that I think coaches can use, and I use it all the time. I've taught it to the FBI and special forces and first responders. I've taught it in baseball. I've taught it to almost every sport. I've taught it in business, and so I want to share it with your audience. And so this is just a sort of one of those really practical takeaways that people can use. So I created a protocol called CAPE, CAPE. And and I'm happy to actually send it to you for your listeners. If they click on a link, they can download the PDF. But it's kind of one of my secret sauce things. But so C stands for control. So control yourself. Okay, so think about, a police officer walking up to a vehicle in front of them, or think of like a baseball pitcher, or think of like, a high school girl shooting free throw was about to shoot a free throw. Like it works everywhere. So C is control yourself. That universal sign to relax is take that deep breath. Maybe you have a little bit of a habit of, touching your elbow or scratching your head or whatever. It doesn't matter what it is. But the first thing is to control yourself. Okay. The second thing is to assess the situation. And by the way, you don't need a pencil and paper to assess a situation. Your brain is so amazing. Just take a moment to say, okay, what's going on around me? Like, what do I notice? So you assess the situation. The P is make a plan. So plan. And yeah, if the ball comes to me, what am I going to do? And so again, your brain is working so fast, but it sort of have a generalized plan in your head. And then E stands for execute, which has three parts. Trust your plan, trust your training, and trust your instincts. And if you can trust your instincts and play that kind of free, but you're also trusting your training, you're doing what your training told you to do, and you're trusting your plan, that's a pretty good recipe for success. So the beauty in this is that it's actually distracting from all the things that they could be thinking about. Like I'm in a shooting slump, or there's someone in the stands I want to impress, or I'm nervous about what my coach or my parents are going to say. Yeah, you know what? Just cape as often as you can in a game and keep focused on the next play.
Yeah, I love that. And I hope people were taking notes during that, but I would also, yeah, if there's a link to a PDF, I'd love to share that because I think that it is super helpful and really practical that an athlete can take themselves through that and a coach can encourage that type of process as well. I have a little case study here that I would like to go over. I have a couple and I'm trying to figure out which one I want to start with. Let's start with this one. So let's say a dedicated player holds herself to really, really high standards. So if she misses a shot, or makes a bad pass, a turnover, she gets visibly frustrated, checks out mentally and lets it affect the rest of the game. And as a coach or a parent, you often hear them say things like, "I'm terrible," or "I'm letting everyone down." How would you help a player shift from that negative soft self-talk to maybe a little bit more positive or a growth mindset?
Hmm. Yeah, so a growth mindset, generally speaking, comes quite naturally to people. So they either have a growth mindset or a fixed mindset. It's very difficult to change that. I know Carolyn Dweck wrote her book on growth mindset. Yeah, you know, it's a great book, but helping people that have a growth mindset's not that difficult because they're so hungry to keep growing. I had one client that didn't even let me finish a session and went in and then put stuff into practice that I was saying. Like it was crazy. So people with a growth mindset, it comes pretty natural to them. The fixed mindset is way more fun. and way more challenging because those are the people that you got to figure out a way to unlock them. They're way more fun to work with, I think, because it's fun for me. So the self-talk is a big deal and helping people change their self-talk. So the first thing I would say is you're not allowed to talk to yourself in any negative way because it's not producing anything good in you. So when you self-talk, you're not really thinking like, how is this producing something good? And you really need to ask that question. Are my thoughts producing something good? So what's the production of my thoughts? But you have to fill that with something. You can't just say, well, don't think about this. You have to say, no, no, no. I mean, what can I give people to think about? Well, they can cape for sure. The second thing they can do is understand that there are four different kinds of self-talk. So one of them is motivational, one of them is instructional, another one is focus, and another one is calm and relaxing. So if they don't fall under those four categories, you just have to catch yourself and say, okay, I'm aware that it's not one of those four things. And I'm not allowed to think about anything else other than those four things during competition. I mean, basically anytime, but especially during competition. So those are the only four things you're allowed to be able to communicate to yourself. And I would say the third thing is this concept of resetting. So George Kittle from the San Francisco 49ers, he has a red button on his uniform. And after every single play, whether it was good or bad, he hits that reset button. And so every single play, all he thinks about is I got to get back to the huddle and get the next play to be at my very best and then try again. And that's it. So he's constantly resetting after every single play. And the second part, or part B of that, is to go into neutral thinking. So we have to stop judging ourselves and judging everything that's going on around us as good or bad. So that judgment actually is really working against us. So if we can practice the art of non-judgment when we're playing, we can play so much more free. We're not attaching a value to what's going on. So A is reset. B is go into neutral thinking, and all you're focused on is what you need to do next to be at your very best. And then post a game, what they can do is postpone or schedule their emotions. So, in other words, Elspeth, like when's the worst time to evaluate after a loss?
Probably right after.
Exactly, just right
Yeah.
after a loss, right?
Yeah.
You're not, I mean, the goal of evaluating is for you to get better, right? And
Hmm.
so there's too much emotion involved in the moment. So what I often coach my players to do is to say, listen, when do you want to evaluate your performance? Like, let's postpone your emotions. We're not shoving them under the rug. We're just postponing them or we're scheduling them. So when would you like to feel? Well, I'd be in a much better position to evaluate my performance and feel stuff tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Great. So what I'd like you to do tonight is just to go home and relax, be with your family, hang out, watch a movie. I don't care what you do. But yeah, why don't you postpone your emotions till tomorrow and then feel whatever you want to feel for a set amount of time. You want to feel bad for an hour? Go ahead. Yeah, you can feel, you want to say it for, you want to do it for 2 hours? Good. Get it all out, right? Get it all out for an hour or two, and then be done. And when you're done, you'll be done. So it's a good way to process the negative emotion attached to an event, but you also realize that the negative emotion was far more intense immediately after a game as opposed to. So that's why you'll hear a lot of players, kind of shake their head and say, I just got to look at the film. I gotta evaluate it, because that's the goal of evaluation is just to say, okay, where did I go wrong and what can I learn? So it's a very progressive, like I want to be better and I'll use my emotions to be better, but I'll do that tomorrow when I'm more likely to learn from it.
Yeah, nothing is ever as good or as bad as we think it was.
Hmm.
And me and one of my college teammates, we talk about this kind of often, or at least, like a couple times a year. But there was this one game where I swear I threw her, it was like from half court, I threw her like this alley-oop and she like was like right at the rim and it
Yeah.
was like beautiful. It was an and one. And when we watched that back, it did not look anything like we imagined it to look in our heads. I mean, it was still cool, but it wasn't like as cool as we remember it. So for that one, we choose to remember it the way we feel like we want to remember it.
Why not?
But yeah, I think those were three like very, very practical reminders. So like the reset was one, and I've seen some athletes, it's like two claps. So like the first clap, you can get your emotions out. The second clap, boom, you're moving on to whatever's next. Observing instead of judging. So you're being, a scientist, you're observing something objectively rather than judging it and placing emotion to it. And and I think that's one that's really helpful. That's actually one that I'm really focused on instilling in some of the athletes that I work with now because I feel like confidence wavers so much into with the outcome. And so it's
Hmm.
like trying to detach the outcome and just focused on being observant in their game. I think it has been kind of helpful for the athletes that at least I work with. And then the third one you said, oh yeah, scheduling time. And I would encourage anybody who's listening to this to just try that one because it's so helpful. It's like so helpful for your brain to know, okay, I don't have to be mad about it now. I could be mad, tomorrow about it. Or I have, it's an away game. We're on the bus. I have until this bus ride is over and then I'm done with it.
Yeah.
And it's like you can trick your brain into agree like you make that agreement and then you just do it and you just feel so much better. So I would really encourage that third one is really, really good, I think.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. And finally, I guess I would also say, I mean, obviously I'm a mental performance coach, so I believe in the value of preparing mentally for things. But one stat that I always find completely remarkable is in 2019 in the NHL, they did a survey of like where the players were drafted. So out of all the players in the NHL in 2019, it was like, 36% with the first round. There was like, 19% in the second round. You know what the third largest group of players that played in the NHL? You know where they were from? It was undrafted,
Oh.
which is like completely shocking to me, but not in a way. But what it shows me is that there's all these players playing college and professional sports that maybe didn't get drafted really high, or they weren't a high recruit, or they thought that they would never be able to make it. Nobody noticed. And yet they kind of kept at it, which is all mindset, which is all mental performance.
Hmm.
And so just remember, like, even if you maybe you don't feel like you're the star player, or, maybe, that you're not as good as somebody else and you're playing the comparison game. But you know what? If you just stay at work on things, like you just stay working on things and you don't give up and you persevere and you have a really strong mental game, who knows what can happen? You just never know.
Yeah, generally, and I'm sure you can relate to this too, and you can maybe you agree, maybe you don't, but I feel like a lot of times the businesses or the people who end up succeeding, it's not because they did anything special, they just outlasted, right? They
Yeah.
just kept at it, consistent action, and then they turn around and nobody's with them, and that's why, they kind of succeed.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I have a last couple questions that I ask all the guests, and I know you said you're not a big book reader, so maybe this answer will be a little bit different. But I'll say what book, podcast, or resource would you recommend every young athlete read or listen to, and why?
Yeah, I would say there's a book by Jeff Olson called The Slight Edge. And I think he has one for teens as well,
Oh,
if
cool.
I'm not mistaken. But the whole book is about sort of that what you just mentioned. It's like, you know what? There's no shortcuts here. Like if I just keep at something, it's inevitable that I will succeed. And I love that. So my story behind that book is Chris Peterson, who is one of the most winningest football coaches in college football history. He said, in order to be a coach on my staff, you have to read The Slight Edge. And so I was like, you know what? I better get that book and read it. What's it all about? But it was just about being consistent in what you're doing and not stopping. And so he based the premise of the book is that sort of you have this baseline of happiness and joy and productivity. And when you're below the line, then you kind of feel like, oh, I better make a change. Things are really bad and I'm frustrated. I'm ready to make changes. And then once people hit the like I'm okay stage, like the average line, they stop everything that they were doing to get themselves out of the hole, they stopped doing and they start coasting. And you never ever really get to like move far beyond what you're capable of. Like you are capable of amazing things, but it's just that you stop doing those things. And so the whole book is about, yeah, there's no like winning the lottery here, right? Like just work hard and be consistent and don't stop doing the things that make you successful. And I love the concept. So I think that would be a great book for your listeners.
Love it. And I wrote it down too, because I feel like I need to grab a copy as well. All right. If you could make one rule that all basketball coaches and trainers had to follow, what would it be and why?
Hmm. Well, I would say, earlier you mentioned an acronym, right? You're the CEO of your own life. And I would say you're also the CBO, the Chief Belief Officer of whatever you're a part of, whether you own a company or whether you're a coach on a team or an assistant coach. Listen, someone's got to be the chief belief officer. And what I think is fascinating, because I think it's easy to kind of write off the word as saying, well, that's sort of ethereal, universal. Like you got to believe. But actually, belief is essential. And I remember talking to Andy McCabe from the Mariners, the mental performance coach with them. And he said the very first thing we talk about in training camp, the very first thing every single year is belief. Do you believe that if you put in the work and you work hard, that you can be a Major League Baseball player or that you can achieve whatever your goal is? Maybe it's to be an all-star or hit 300 or whatever the case is. If you don't believe, you're in trouble. But belief is necessary, and someone's got to embody that, and you have to embody that for your team and your own life. You are the CBO of your own life.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. Um, but yeah, Gary, I mean, is there anything, or if people wanted to keep up with you or figure out, what you have going on, where can they find you? How can they contact you?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram because that's where most athletes are. So that's where I mostly hang out and camp out. So Elite Mindset, and I'm the guy with the blue verified dot. So Elite Mindset on Instagram. People can shoot me messages on there too, and I respond to all of them. Um, and then online at elitemindsetnation.com. And I have a free gift. Every Monday morning, I send out a Monday morning mindset text. It's based on mindset and leadership every Monday morning at 8:05 Pacific and different times around the country, of course. But you can get sort of a mindset text just to set your week right. And so it's sometimes it's challenging, sometimes it's encouraging, sometimes it's educational, but it's just to help get people's minds right. So they can go to my website, Elite Mindset Nation. It's right on the front page. You can't miss it. And so you can get that delivered. I don't spam people. It's just straight up just gas, right? Here's something encouraging for the week. And then something I'm super proud of that I haven't advertised a whole lot yet, but I just created a mental performance assessment. It's the most thorough assessment online, I think, in the world for mental performance. And I know this stuff because I geek out on like research papers and stuff. And I've been like working on this for a couple of years. So you can go to elitemindset assessment.com, and I want to give a gift to your listeners. So if they go to the elitemindset assessment.com and they type in elite 50, they can get 50% off. And it's only $10 at that point. Usually these cost anywhere between 40 and $150.
Hmm.
So they can get it for $10. So it's elitemindset assessment.com, elite 50. Elite is all capitals, by the way. And they can take that assessment for only $10.
Oh, perfect. And I'll put all of your contact and all of that information in the show notes as well. So it should be pretty easy to follow. But Gary, I've really enjoyed our conversation, and I think there are so many things. Honestly, if I were listening, I would say, rewind to some of those parts, take some notes, because I think there was a lot of practical advice in there. So Gary, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. If you aren't already, I would highly recommend subscribing to the podcast so you can get updated once new episodes are dropped. If you're a fan of the show, go ahead and leave a review. It really helps spread the word to more athletes, parents, and coaches. Now, if you have any questions for myself or future guests, feedback, or you're curious on how we can work together to help you reach your basketball goals, let's have a conversation. Feel free to email me at l@hoopsthroughlife.com today to set that up. That's EL@HOOPS THROUGHLIFE.com. Thank you, and I look forward to hearing from you soon.